Hello there, and welcome to another QML tutorial with Joseph. In this tutorial, we're going to discuss slots, as in the last tutorial we had discussed signals and using signals. So if we look at our last example right here, we have a text stream that's bringing in, that we called in, that's bringing in a file from a file name here called mfile. And we have this thing right here that checks to see if it can open up. If not, it just returns. And then we're not really doing anything with the lines that we're reading each line by line by line. Then we close the file and flush the file. Flush is really not needed all that much, but I don't know. Anyways, so let's take a look at slots today, okay? So we have our file reader, and let's go ahead and do something. Let's do some error checking, I guess. So let's first process this part right here, the line. Let's actually make a line. Let's use that line. So let's switch over to our header right here. Let's go ahead and say QProperty. And we're going to say QString. And the QString is going to be called output. Right? And we don't need to write it because it's going to be a read-only property that we're getting, right? Okay, so output changed we can notify. We could call that output changed or even done reading as our signal. So let's go ahead and set the getter on that. So QString and output. And in our signals here, let's do a void and a output. Changed. And in our private, let's go ahead and make a QString called moutput. Okay. Now let's go ahead and go over to our header file, or our sources file, and start to implement this. But we can just right-click here, refactor, add definition to FileReader. Inside of here, we're going to do a return output. Okay. Okay. So now let's go ahead and look at setting a signal and a slot mechanism. Excuse me. So right click right here, switch back over to our header, and let's go ahead and make some slot. Let's make a slot right here. Let's say protected slots. Okay. And what we're going to do here is we're going to say void, say handle out, and we're going to pass in a QString, and it's going to be the output. So let's go ahead and refactor this. And what we're going to do here is we're going to do the same thing as we always do. We're going to say if moutput is equal to output, then return else output is now equal to output. And we don't need a signal on this because, well, we already have a signal. We could add one if we wanted to, but there's no real reason. So now what we're going to do here is that we're going to make a error slot also too. So let's go ahead and switch back over to our header here, and let's go ahead and say void, and we're going to say handle error, and we're going to pass in a QString and the error. Okay, now let's make a signal, and we'll call it got error, and we'll pass a QString into the got error signal. Okay. Now let's go ahead and go up to our QProperty up here, and let's create a new one. QProperty, and what we're going to do is make a QString, and we're going to call it error string. And we don't need to notify when the error string is changed. We can do that. But we don't need a write. It's going to be a read-only property. Now let's go ahead and do a Q string, error string. Okay, down to our private, and we're going to do a Q string, and you probably guessed it by now, m error string. Okay, so we need to refactor the error string, so right-click, refactor, add definition, and return m error string. Okay. Now we also need to go back over to our header here, and we need to refactor our signal here, or I'm sorry, our slot here, the handle of the error string. Refactor this, add this to main.cpp, and we're going to say, just like in our handle out, we're going to handle our error. We're going to say if the error string, if m error string is equal to ERR, then return. Else, let's do m error string equals error, and let's go ahead and emit a signal called error, which we have not set up yet. So let's do that. We can right click here, refactor. Oh, it doesn't let us. Okay, so let's just right click and go to our header, and then in our slot we'll say void error. Simple. Okay, so we have some signals now, and we have some slots, and we have everything kind of implemented. So let's actually go back over to our source, and let's go inside of right here. So if the file can't open, then we're just returning, but instead what we can do is we can actually make a error. We can actually emit some stuff here, right? Let's clear up. Let's take return out, and let's go ahead and say, what did we call that signal? I think it was I can't remember. Let's go back over to our header here, and it was called got error. Okay. And the error is going to be could not open file for reading. Right? So we just set the error, the signal, and the Q string inside of it. Now, inside of here, inside of our M process, if we do get it, let's go ahead and say, what did we call it? Got output or something. Output changed. That should be a Q string inside of there. So let's go ahead and go back over here, and inside of here we're going to say output changed, and we're going to pass in the line, right? And we're going to do a read all instead of the reading line by line. We're going to read it all into it. Okay, so now what we're doing here is we're saying, okay, signal that we got a line right here. If we got an error, signal that we got an error right here, right? But we have these setters, kind of, right, that are already set up for us. We just need to be able to actually say, hey, you know, something's going on here, right? So let's go back over to our header over here. Let's actually take these notifications out of here. This output change does not need to be there. We're just going to have that as a read-only property. And the notification of error string changed is also not needed. But, I mean, we could keep it there if we wanted to, but it's really not needed. You will see why in a bit. Save our code here. And let's go back over to our header over here. And so inside of here, what we're going to do is we're going to connect those signals, okay, to our slots so that this happens automatically no matter what. So to do this, we do a connect, and we say this, Okay, so that's our pointer. That's our pointer. In this case, it's going to be FileReader. We're going to say this, and we're going to declare a signal. And inside of that signal, we're going to say what signal we want to declare. So the first one that we want to declare is got error, and it passes in a Q string. Then what we need to do is we need to set up its slot. So its pointer, this, and then the declaration of the slot, and then we're going to pass it into the handle error. Okay. Make sure we have it all syntaxed correctly. So to go over this one more time, we have a this right here, and if we hover over this, you can see it's actually the FileReader, so the class itself. And it says, hey, if we get this signal right here, oops, if we get this signal right here, right, called got error, and it passes in this Q string, automatically pass it over to this guy right here, right? Okay, so it's just a way of passing things back and forth to each other that the meta object compiler of Qt kind of helps us all with. Right, so let's go ahead and connect the other one. So connect this, what do we call it, error string or something, or I'm sorry, output changed. So we declare the signal, and output changed. And then we're going to give it its slot. So this, right, and then its slot is going to be handle out. Okay. Make sure we have all of our things here. Now what we can do is clean this up a little bit by pressing the Control J. And we have these in single lines. And this right here should be a semicolon, as we all know. So let's go back and take a look at this. These do not need to be passed in like so. And let's go over to our header and fix that over here also too. I guess we could put a const too, but whatever. Okay, so now that we have all of that, right, so anytime that we get an output change signal, right, okay, it's going to pass it over to our handle, the output, right? Anytime we get an error signal, we're going to pass it over to the error, right? And then we also have this signal called error right here, which is just a void signal, and we can see that right here we have this emit of this error. So in QML, we'll know that there's an error, right? So if we go back over here to our main.qml right here, and we go in and we say FileReader, it's not showing up. Let's take a look at our main.cpp. That's why we have not declared it in our class yet. So let's go ahead and say include QML. Okay, and now what we're going to do right here is we're also going to include the FileReader header. Wonderful. So now underneath, excuse me, underneath our engine here, what we can do is we can say QML, Q contextual, what is it, QML register type. Okay, and now we're going to register the class of FileReader. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to say what's the import called. We'll say files. Okay, and now what version are we going to use? We're going to use 1.0. Okay, or we could use 0.1. Right, and now what do we want to call the class of FileReader itself? Right, so we could call it read file. Okay, so we've now registered this inside of QML itself, right? So we have our own custom class inside of QML, right? We give it the class name right here, okay, that we're getting from our header, right? We then declare what it is, right? So in our import statement, we then give it the integer of the version number and then what we want to call it in QML. So to make this more clear, if we go over to our main.qml over here and we say import files.0.1, right? So now if we go over here and we say, okay, read file, it automatically shows up, right? Okay, so now we can do on error, right? We can do a, we'll say that, let's go ahead and take this text out. Let's make a property here. It's a string, and it's the error. Okay, let's make a property here. It's the out. Oops, it's actually a string. And it's the output. Okay, so on error, what do we want to do? We want to change. We want to console log it. We'll say console.log. There has been a error plus the error string. Okay. Now let's give this an ID. Call it reader, right? And now let's also go back over to our file reader over here. And inside of here, we need to be able to declare that this output has changed right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to say emit text changed. Let's take this, go back over to our header over here, and underneath our signals, we're going to do a void text changed. Okay. And we'll go back over here to our main, and we'll say on text changed. Let's also go to here and give this thing an ID. We'll say ID foobar. Say foobar dot text. Oops. Text is now going to be equal to output. Cool. Let's clean this up. Okay. Now we also have to read from this, right? So up here on this mouse click area right here, what we're going to do is we're going to say console, or whoops, we're going to say on clicked reader dot read file. Right? And now we also have to declare what file we want to read, right? So let's just go grab any random old file. Maybe we can actually just grab this guy right here. So let's go ahead and show this guy, and it's containing, sure, and it's containing folder here. Okay, so we got a terminal right here, right? So we know it's underneath the desktop, so we'll say file name, okay, is equal to home Joseph desktop, and it's cppqml pat 1, and it's going to be the cppqml pat 1.pro. Okay, so let's take a look at here and kind of recap again. And we have this output changed here, and that emits the signal that says handle the output, right? Then we have this text change, so we have an on text change there, right? Let's go up here. We have our signals, got error, passes in the Q string, handles it over. We have an error right here in the handle error, and the handle out does not need that anymore. Let's check that down here too. Okay, we're looking pretty good, passing everything in pretty well. Text area, that's where we do it. We set our file name from our setter. All these things seem to be working pretty well at this point. These guys right here can actually be set up here. Okay, and I'll take these, oops, clean our code up here, And let's give it a run and see what happens. Hopefully I spelled everything right. So we have no text there right now, and when we click on it, there is the text. So we've read from that file. Alright, pretty good, pretty neat. So let's close this, and we can hit it again, and it'll do the same thing over and over and over again. So how do we get an error? And let's check on our error string checker, right? We could say console log there has been an error, so on and so forth, and then the error string. Well, we could probably just say, take that out of there. Run it. There has been an error, could not open file for reading. And that's slots for us. It's really not that hard. Take some time, practice it up, and the next tutorial what we'll be discussing is how we can actually take those slots and tie them into separate other classes, right? Like for instance, maybe we wanted to take the error from the actual Q file, right? Like what was the last error the Q file returned, and then pass that in also too, right? And then we could do all sorts of different stuff. So instead of, this right here, right, we would pass in a pointer to Q file. Right. So this is Joseph. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I hope you're having a good day, and be nice to everybody out there. I'm going to let this run for a couple seconds because I've been noticing that I've been having some trouble with my audio. But I hope that you enjoyed this and have a good day.